Hey guys, now we're going to talk about how to set up a um, Ethernet driver for this micrologix 1100. So we just configured the serial, got the serial driver set up, got communication with serial cable. The micrologix 1100 that we specifically got has the option for Ethernet as well, and generally Ethernet's easier to set up. So usually your processor will already have an IP address in it. These are all brand new, so none of them have IP addresses in it. So you have to connect with serial first. So we're going to need RSLinx to make sure we have a connection with serial. And we still do. Expand that. I can see my processor. I can right click and go on driver diagnostics. You can see my packets are going up, so I'm connected to the processor. Now I'm going to go on RSLinx Micro. I'm going to go to active. It's going to bring up the same driver as RSLinx. I'm going to connect to micrologix. And so I have a file right on the desktop from last time I did this, but for whatever reason it doesn't like to. Oh, now I remember. This is an important point to share. If your files are on the desktop, it doesn't like to find them. So let me see if I put that in that testing folder. Let me just double check that this is what I remember being correct. So if I go to the testing folder, now I bet it'll show. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, for whatever reason, it's not synced. So this is an RSLinx or a RSLogix. This one's RSLogix 5, and the one that I just drug into testing there was for RSLogix 500, because it's the same one that I used in a separate video just a minute ago. But for whatever reason, RSLogix does not want to see these files. You know what? I bet if I just double click to open this, I bet it'll see it. Now I will go along with that processor. Yeah, so now it works, but for whatever reason, it did not show me that as an option for a file when I wanted to go online with this processor. Anyway, we're in remote program mode, and we want to go to channel configuration, and channel 0 is the serial. So you remember we're at 19.2 for our baud rate, and the handshaking and all this. You should see all these same things in Linx. All these same options will be set up in Linx. And then channel 1 is going to be our Ethernet. What do I need to do here? I'm going to have to go offline. Go back to where I was, channel 1 for my Ethernet. Turn off auto negotiate. Turn off boot P enable. And I can leave the rest of the way it is. My IP address. So the easiest thing is to change it to the first 3 octets, these first 3 numbers to the same of what your computer is. But just for the sake of education, I will change it to something else. 192, 168, 10, and I'll change this to 5. So this is what the IP of the processor is going to be. It's a brand new processor, so it doesn't have an IP address in it. I can set it to whatever I want for my local network, whatever I deem is appropriate. Each one of these sections is called an octet. So there's 4 octets in an IP address. The range is from 0 to 255 is the highest number that you can put in there. This first octet is called the A class. The second octet is called the B class. Third octet is called the C, and then D. So your first 3 octets have to be the same in your processor as they are on your network card on your computer. So you're on the same A, B, and C class network. And then the last octet has to be something different. So if I change my IP address on my processor to be this, the IP address on the network card of my computer I'm connecting to it with has to be 192.168.10 and then something other than 5. If my computer is also 5, then you're sending and receiving data to the exact same address, and both of your things are addressed the same. So it's not going to work. All the packets are going to collide. It's not going to happen. So it has to be, the first three have to be the same, and the last one has to be different. Subnet mask is going to be 255, 255, 255, and then leave that at 0. What this means is the first octet has to be identical, the second octet has to be identical, third octet has to match or be identical, and then the last octet can be anything. So the processor is going to be a 5, and my computer is going to be something other than a 5, and we'll still be on the same network, right? Gateway will leave zeros, and everything else looks good. Hit apply, hit OK. So as of right now, that channel configuration is in this file that I have open in this RSLogix program. It's not in the processor though. I'm not connected to the processor right now. I'm offline. So I want to go to comms and I want to go to download. Okay. Now it's asking me if I want to download the program that I have open right here into this processor. Yes, I do. Now it's writing it over the serial cable. Warning, loss of communication on channel 1 will occur. I'm communicating over channel 0 for serial. It's just warning me that if I was communicating over channel 1, which is the Ethernet channel, I'm changing the configuration of the Ethernet channel. So if that's what I was using right now to be online with it and download to it, all of a sudden I'm going to lose communication because I'm changing the settings that I'm currently using. But that's not the case. I'm using channel 0 and serial, and I'm changing the configuration on channel 1, so it should be fine. Change was detected with the Ethernet channel configuration. In order for the change to take effect, a power cycle is required. And what they mean by that is a power cycle of the processor, because the processor is on right now. Do you want to go online? Yes. So now I'm online with the processor. It's not in run mode. And I'm just going to double check my channel configuration. Okay. So now I'm looking at, because I'm online, I'm looking at what's actually in the processor. And it saved everything I put in there correctly. So that's good. But they say for it to actually take effect in the processor, you have to cycle power on the processor. Close that. We'll go offline. Now we'll open my links. This is just to show that I'm going offline. So right now I am seeing it with my serial driver. So this is the driver we made before, and it's using the RS-232 serial communication. If I go to drivers, I only have one driver, and it's a serial driver, and it's running, and that's how I'm communicating with the processor right now. So when I cycle this power, you'll see that we got a red X there in a second because I'm going to lose communication with the processor because there's no power. Now when I plug it back in, it'll, in a minute after it boots up and comes back online, you'll see the red X go back off. There it goes. So now I'm back communicating via serial again, but I do not have an Ethernet driver configured or set up, and I'm not communicating through Ethernet yet. That's going to be part 2 of this video. The first part, I just wanted to show you what you have to do if you have a brand new processor and it doesn't have an Ethernet address or Ethernet IP address already installed in the processor. It's just blank. There's no way to connect to it unless you connect via serial first and configure the IP address and the subnet mask, and then you can connect your Ethernet cable to the processor. 99% of the time, you're not going to be installing a brand new processor. You're going to be working on something that's already existing, and it's already going to have an IP address in it, so you're not going to have to do this step. But just so you know, in case this comes up, they don't come with an IP. You have to put the IP in it, and you can set it to anything you want. So now I'm going to cut to what it looks like when you have an IP in there and how you have to configure your computer to connect to the processor over Ethernet IP. Okay, now we're back, and we have an Ethernet cable right here connected to our processor and a serial cable. We should not need the serial cable anymore. Open up RSLinx. And we can see we are connected via serial to this micrologix through the serial driver that we made. Configure drivers. Here's our serial driver. We're going to stop this driver. And you can see there's a red X there. What we need to do is make sure we can communicate before we make an RSLinx driver for Ethernet. Make sure we can communicate from our computer to this processor. So we need to change our IP address on our own computer. Let's see here. And it depends if you have Windows 7 or Windows 10. You want to find change adapter options. And for laptop, usually you'll have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Ethernet. You want to find your wired Ethernet. Go to your properties. And I have a lot of properties here because I connect to a lot of different things, Profinet and all kinds of other things. You want to find your IPv4, your TCP/IPv4 Internet Protocol version. You want to properties. You want to change this from obtain an IP address automatically to use the following IP address. And you want to make the first 3 octets the same as what your processor is. So 192.168.10, and I think we made our processor 5, so I'm going to make this one 10. Subnet mask will be the same. Defaulted gateway is probably all zeros. So this should be all we need. So hit OK, and then hit close and close. And just to make sure we have a good connection, I'm going to close all that out. Probably still need to go back and use it again then. Click here, hit CMD, the letters CMD, Charlie, Mike, Delta, and it'll bring up a command prompt. So if we want to just make sure we have a physical connection and our IPs are okay with that processor, we can use, well, first we can do ipconfig. So it's going to tell us our IP configuration. And this is to verify that my IP address did actually change when I changed it in the settings there. So my IPv4 address, which is the one I changed, 192.168.10.10. So our first 3 octets match what we set in the processor, and our 4th one does not match, which is the way it should be. Then we can do a ping, which means we're going to send some packets over that line and see if we get a response back, meaning something else is on the end of this Ethernet cable that is also in our network, meaning the first 3 octets match based on what we have our subnet mask set for. So we're going to ping 192.168.10.5 because that's what we set the processor to. So it's going to send packets out to this address, and hopefully the processor will send them back. There we go. So we sent 4, we received 4, we lost 0. The average round trip time is 2 milliseconds from there and back, and this is 4 sets of packets that we set. So we have all our IPs configured correctly. And just as a note, you can ping anything. You can ping google.com. Oh, that's a good example, right? Oh, you know why I can't ping it? Because I had to disconnect my Ethernet cable that goes to my internet to connect to this processor. So I don't have internet right now. That's why I can't ping Google. So I'll close that. So the only thing that this computer is connected to, this computer doesn't have Wi-Fi. It's a desktop computer, and it had a hardwired Ethernet for internet to my wireless router. It was hardwired. So now it's connected directly to this processor. So no internet for me right now. That's why a laptop's better, because you can be connected to Wi-Fi and have your Ethernet jack connected to a processor, so you can have internet and be connected to a processor or a PLC at the same time. So now I know that we're on the same network, so we're good. So now I can set my Linx driver. RSLinx Classic. Same thing, we're going to go communication and configure drivers, or just hit that little S cable there. It opens the same thing. And there's 2 different Ethernet options. We want Ethernet/IP driver. The other option's Ethernet devices. We're not going to do that. We're going to add a new, the same way as we did with serial. And we're going to call it whatever we want. So I'm going to call it 1100 Ethernet. Okay. Probably because I have spaces. Let's see here. There it goes. So your Windows computer is going to have a default Ethernet adapter. And then other times you'll have multiple different ones. So you'd have a wired Ethernet here. You'd have your wireless Ethernet. You have a couple other options like on laptops. This one, my Windows default, is also my only Ethernet adapter. So I can select Windows default or that one because it's the only one I have. And it tells you what the IP is currently set for each one too. So you can pick the one that you know is set right, which this one's my only option. And the IP is set right, so that's good. hit apply and OK. So now I have an Ethernet driver running. I stopped my serial driver. I have an Ethernet driver running. I can close this, and then when I look at my network here, see, this is why you name your drivers, because now it's starting to get kind of confusing, and I only have one processor, right? Imagine if you had 20 different pieces of equipment that all had different IP addresses and needed different drivers. This would get really crowded here, and if you just let them select the default name for all your drivers, it gets real confusing. So 1100 Ethernet, I know this is for my micrologix 1100, and it's the Ethernet driver. If I open this up and click here, there's my processor. And this one even gives me more information about my processor name and all that. Let's see, what do I want to do here? Device properties. There you go. So because I'm connected over Ethernet, not serial, it actually gives me more information just in RSLinx than I would normally get. So it's the device name, the vendor, product code, serial number, revision, all this different information. Close this. So now, because I can see it over this Ethernet driver, I can minimize this, and I can open RSLogix Micro in this case. And I go to comms, and I go who active, and go online. And here's the serial driver that I was using. You see the red X because I don't have my serial driver running, and I can disconnect my serial cable, so you know I'm only connected via Ethernet. And when I mean I don't have it running, I mean in RSLinx. Let's make this less confusing for you guys. Sorry. Well, I cancel that, minimize that. So here's my RSLinx, my micrologix driver, or my serial driver. I have stopped right here. The only driver I have running is my Ethernet driver. So that is why when I open this up and go to comms and who active, it shows a red X here because this is looking at my serial driver, which isn't running in Linx. Here's my Ethernet driver that I made. If I expand that, I can see my processor right there. Okay. And for whatever reason, it doesn't like to use the files that I already have for it, but just so I can show you that I can go online and create new, and here I am. Now, if you'll notice, this thing is spinning way faster because my communication speed over Ethernet is way faster. Before you saw that animation kind of like creeping along. So I can put this in run mode. And everything is way better communication-wise. Like you see the solid changing of the S bits and all of that. I can look at these, see how fast these status bits are changing now. The reason they looked like they were going slower before is I was over a serial connection, so I wasn't actually seeing every change of them. I was only just catching them every once in a while as they changed because the data transfer of when I was online of what I was actually seeing in the processor was a lot slower. Now you can see how fast everything's really going. And scan times. Channel 0 is my serial, which I'm not using. So that's about it. That's how you set up an Ethernet driver and go online. Same as the RSLinx part of it is pretty much the same thing. You just go to communications, configure drivers, available driver types. You select what you want, which is Ethernet, add a new, oh, not devices, sorry. So there's two different ones. When we want the Ethernet IP, they add new, and the default one, it just makes a second one. And I can make another one. I can make as many as I want with the same IP, but it gets confusing and there's really no reason to. So that's the one that's running. Really the confusing part is if you've never done it before, changing your own IP address. So just to rehash that, change adapter options. There's a couple different ways to get this change adapter options, depending on what menu you're looking at. So when you get to the Ethernet status and it looks like this, you go to properties. I probably went through this pretty quick the first time I went through it. And the fourth one down in my case is Internet Protocol version 4 or IPv4. That's what you want to change. Properties, and here it is. You got to change to use the polygon address, and it doesn't actually change it until you hit OK. So if you go in here and change all this, but just leave all these windows and then go somewhere else, it's not really going to do it. You got to hit, I think it's OK and apply. But just to show you, so we know the processor is 5 for the last octet. So if I hit OK, close and close. Now I should have some issues. Yeah, so it kicked me off. Communication lost to processor because I changed my IP address to the exact same as the processor. That's a big issue. People do that a lot when they start out, especially in like micrologix and higher end systems. It scrolls what the IP address is across the front of the processor. So people just type that into their computer, whatever it's in the processor, and they always forget to change the last octet to something other than what that is. So I want to go RSLinx. And once I go to RSLinx, you should see that the processor is not shown anymore. It still shows it, but it shouldn't because I have the, maybe it's just going to take a second to update. It shouldn't detect it because we have the same IP address. Yeah, actually I think RSLinx just locked up on me. There it goes. So now it's red X. And that is all due to my IP address being exactly the same. Properties, this last octet, if I change that to a 4 or a 6, it'll work as long as it's not the same. Okay, and hit close. Close this. Now this, once this updates, RSLinx is really old software, so it might take a second. Or you know what, we'll probably speed it up if I just stop the driver and start it again. There it is. And just to make sure, I'm not sure why that's not changing, it's weird. But needless to say, I would have a red X there if I was not connected. And just to double check, so I hit retry on here and it immediately reconnected in my RSLogix. And it's staggering how much faster this thing spins when you're on Ethernet versus serial, and how everything else is like immediate and real time. So status bits and everything else. So you'll definitely see a difference. It's way better to use Ethernet if you can. And for networking to HMIs and everything else, it's way better to use Ethernet. If you have an HMI and it's going over serial, a lot of times you touch a button to change something and there's like a noticeable lag by the time it transmits everything and changes the status of the bit in the processor and everything else. But Ethernet is like real time all the time. So I'm going to put the processor back into program mode, which is going to stop the execution of the tasks, but I'm still in line with it. I'm going to go offline. There you go. I'm not going to save changes. And I'm just going to close all this out. And that's it. There's my Ethernet driver. And here's my serial driver. Notice my serial driver not connected, Ethernet driver still connected even though I closed out RSLogix. And that's that.